This is the Vienna Theatre, in the home of classical music. And to many people, classical music is proper music, whereas any music from today is modern rubbish. For example, there's a government minister that claimed that urban violence is caused by rap. But if violence is caused by music about violence, what impact must Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture have had? The 19th century must have been awash with drive-by cannonings. And maybe it shouldn't be surprising that not that many people today in Britain listen to classical music, when for years the only place you could hear it was on the old Radio 3, which had these peculiar passionless presenters that you could have put on a pirate radio station and they'd say, "This next piece comes in 5 movements, 2 verses, 2 choruses and a middle 8. And it's fascinating to note how the composer, Mr. 50 Cent, blends the pianoforte with the lyrics as they begin. I'm a cop killer, gonna shoot you up the arse." And recently I was flicking through the channels and found a classical music concert live from the Barbican. And a pundit was explaining how this next piece was about space and moving our internal boundaries. And then it turned out that the whole piece was entirely silent. And then later, a panel reviewing it said that they'd been particularly fortunate because they'd also seen the rehearsal.
The one I would have heard in rehearsal was quite different from the one that you just saw.
This is the sort of thing that puts many sane people off of classical music altogether, which is a tragedy, especially when it comes to Beethoven, because Beethoven was a rapper and a punk, the Johnny Cash, the Hendrix, the Marley of his day. His life was a story of genius, but it was a genius that he was aware was worthless unless it was driven by passion and inspired by the ideals of the French Revolution and the era of Napoleon. It's a story of a man who became one of the grumpiest people in history, possibly due to the bad luck of being one of the greatest ever composers and going stone deaf. Beethoven was born in Bonn in Germany in 1770, and Bonn was the German centre of the movement that spread throughout Europe in the 18th century, promoting the ideals of science, reason, unified nations, and in some cases democracy, in opposition to royalty, the church and the aristocracy. So Beethoven was brought up in a town buzzing with this radicalism, but also his greatest early influence was an enthusiastic member of the Masons, Mozart. Mozart was born 14 years before Beethoven in Salzburg and became a Mason because they were opposed to a society that viewed everybody according to the rank they were born into. That included musicians, who were considered as servants to play like performing animals for the royal court. An advert in a Vienna newspaper read,
"A musician is wanted who plays the piano well and can sing too. Must also perform the duties of a valet de chambre."
Mozart performed for Archbishop Colloredo and had to sit at the table just above the cooks but below the valets. So musicians and composers were very much a part of the mood for change, and this was the atmosphere during Beethoven's childhood. His father taught music to nobles, and as soon as Ludwig could play the piano, he was taken to perform for them. Except that Beethoven's dad would lie about his age to make his son look more of a prodigy than he was. Ludwig was clearly a brilliant musician, but his originality only became apparent when he began to be taught by Christian Neef. Neef's main influence on Beethoven may have been his obsession with emotions. He thought,
"A musician cannot move others unless he too is moved. Play from the soul, not like a trained bird."
Under Neef's guidance, Beethoven wrote his first orchestral work when he was 14, and one musicologist described it like this:
"Beethoven uses not just semiquaver runs, but semiquavers in parallel thirds, and in the second movement launches into extensive runs in demi-semiquavers, hemi-demi-semiquavers, and even at one point semi-hemi-demi-semiquavers." Snotty little punt. See, that's where he could have done with a working class family. Instead of indulging him, they'd have gone, "Do that again and I'll semi-hemi-demi-semiquaver you, you little show-off." When the French Revolution began, Beethoven was still only 18. And the revolutionary atmosphere had an impact on Beethoven in one obvious way, in that it signalled the end of musicians relying on royal patronage. Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven all stopped working for royalty. Beethoven expressed his radicalism saying that even the tempo of a piece of music must not be a controlling tyrant, nor a mechanical hammer. It should be to a piece of music what the pulse is to a man.
And he composed a concerto for a violin that had to be held upside down. Never mind his influence on classical music, he invented the 1960s. To further his career, Beethoven realised he had to come to Vienna, musical capital of Europe, centre for the genius of Mozart and Haydn, and in the future for Schubert, Strauss and Ultravox. But there was another aspect of Beethoven's innovations that was driven by the ideals of the Romantics and the French Revolution. The celebration of the individual. Not in a modern, selfish sense of, I don't see why my taxi should fund the health service because I'm not ill, but in the sense that any individual could aspire to greatness, contrary to the beliefs that dominated before the revolution. One musicologist described him as
rejecting what is universally human for what is individually human.
And the man who embodied the spirit of being individually human more than anybody else was Napoleon. It's hard to imagine how much radicals must have looked up to Napoleon, as he appeared to be somebody who was not only revolutionary, but winning by invading these old states and setting up a new code that included the rights of man. The marches of Napoleon encouraged Beethoven to be stroppy and defiant, politically, culturally and personally. For example, the part of his job that he disliked most was teaching wealthy students who didn't have any real interest in music at all. The nephew of a noble that he was teaching complained
he had the whim of coming to give lessons clad in a dressing gown, slippers and a peaked nightcap.
Another student said he turned up at Beethoven's flat for a lesson, but Beethoven was humming a new tune, and then
he rushed to the piano, and I took a seat in the corner where he forgot about me. He stormed on for about an hour, then got up and, surprised to see me still there, said, "I cannot give you a lesson today, I have work to do."